let us shift now. We're going to shift to our last. We have one more space capsule today, which is back to another literary one. So we're going to look at English sonnets. So I'm going to make some changes here. Let's see. Okay. And I'm going to fetch, where is she? There's Faith. Okay. Okay. Good evening, Faith. How are you?
Hello, Corey. How are you? I'm very well.
Good. Good. All right. So I think we are more or less ready. We have Carrie and Lynn with us. Lynn, are you here?
Hello, Lynn.
I am here.
Oh, how
Excellent.
exciting. And I don't know
Okay.
Carrie, but hello, Carrie.
Hello, Faith.
All
I've got a
right.
screen to share as well, Corey.
Well, let's give that a shot.
Is that working?
Yes, it is.
Lovely.
Yes, it is.
Now, your last one before you go live. Are you live now? I don't know.
Yep. No, we are. We are.
Hello,
We've been live
everybody.
like continuously. So yes.
I was watching Sean's on Twitch, but then I signed off so I wouldn't get double inputs from multiple places.
Exactly.
Lovely. Okay. So Lynn and Carrie, how interactive do you want to be? Because I'm planning to ask you a couple questions, but I'm also planning to start from a very basic place. But if you're happy to talk, I'm going to ask you lots of questions.
All right.
Very well.
And Lynn has had me in class before, although a much more formal one than this. So you know I'm very mean, and I ask all my students lots of questions, although space is not quite as student-teachery as our last interaction. So you can let your hair down a little bit, Lynn.
Okay.
Do you want us just to chat for a few minutes, Corey, and start right on time? Because I know we're a couple minutes early.
Well, I'm just afraid that people might be like fly into some kind of panic.
If we start early,
I know, right? Like what? How? I mean, it's bad enough that we're actually on time today. Now, we've recovered from being late early, and now we're fine. So yeah. But I think we can go at it well, why don't we actually just start, Faith, by you talking a little bit about, because you're offering more than one module for December, right?
I'm offering 2 December modules, and one of them is the one I'm going to preview today, which is English sonnet readings, and the title slide that you see up there, if you're looking at it, is Shakespeare Sonnet 2. So each session of the 8 in December, or it might end up being 7 with Christmas, I'm not sure how that works. Each one of those sessions, we're going to focus on a different sonnet, maybe 2 if we have time. So I'll always have a primary sonnet and 1 in reserve. And we'll just sort of talk through the sonnets and different ways to approach them, context about the sonnets when I know it, to give students background. But I recently published a book on Shakespeare's sonnets, actually about a year ago now, and it was on Shakespeare's sonnets. So today we're doing Shakespeare's sonnet because that's my easy thing to do. And one of the things that I found when I started reading Shakespeare's sonnets is everybody's told how to read them, but there are actually a lot more ways to read sonnets than the ways that sort of schools tell you should read sonnets. And so today I'm going to take Sonnet 2 and hopefully undo everything you've ever been told about how you ought to read Sonnet 2 and force you to read it for yourselves as if it's something new that you've never encountered. And we're going to pretend for today that you've never heard about Shakespeare. And then the other module that I'm offering is a very, very, very introduction to Latin. And I've done some Latin precepting for Signum before, And actually, I know at least one person who's watching right now has suffered through Latin with me. Sorry.
Latin 1 and Latin 2.
Latin 1 and Latin 2. I didn't want to call you out because I didn't know if you wanted to acknowledge that.
So now, now we're getting the context of the mean calling upon here. So okay, right.
Well, I believe I've had Lynn in 2 of my classes. Actually, I think you've also took my epic class and
Yes.
possibly my Shakespeare class.
No.
I feel like I see you all the time, Lynn. And so when we do Latin for the MA at Signum and for the diploma, the graduate classes, it's very formal and it's very structured, and there's hundreds of words to memorize and there's hundreds of grammatical forms to memorize. It's, I don't want to say awful, but it's a lot to pack into a semester. And so when I was designing the introductory Latin module for Signum, I thought we need to do something really different for clubs, for space, which is coming out of clubs. And the goal of clubs is to let somebody who's never had Latin before come in and figure out just how to understand it. So a lot like Sean's module that we just saw on the Twitch channel an hour ago, my goal with this class is not so much to make you memorize anything, but to probably ask all my students to buy or get access to a Latin dictionary and some kind of page with really good Latin forms. And then we're just going to figure out, like, how do you really use a Latin dictionary if you have basic to mediocre Latin skills? What Latin forms do you need to know? How can we attack it? And because we're starting in December, I thought, wouldn't it be so fun to pick Christmas carols? So we're going to structure a lot of that around the Christmas carols and a couple scripture readings from the book of John, which has the imperfect case and is a really easy reading text to start with. And then we'll add in the Christmas carols so that if you go to church and you get to the church in Christmas time, you can actually understand the words of Veni Veni and Emmanuel as you're singing it just right leading up to Christmas and right after, because it's technically a post-Christmas carol. Or sorry, that's an Advent carol, but then we'll do a Deste Fideles, which is the post-Christmas carol. So right. I'm really excited about both of these, and now I've wasted all our time. So.
Hey, no, that's good. We're not early anymore. That's exactly why I wanted to give you that chance, so we wouldn't start the meat of the thing until it was actually time.
Okay. So my module today, you can see on the screen that I'm talking about Shakespeare's Sonnet 2. It might be where we start for the actual module. I haven't decided. But I just want you to pretend you've never heard any of these words before. Once upon a time, there was this guy. He lived in England, and his name was Shakespeare. And if you have been forced to take an English literature class at any point in your life, you have heard Shakespeare's name, and you probably have terrifying associations involved with it. And if any of my former students at any point are watching this on any of our broadcasts, I'm so sorry, because I've probably given you some of those bad associations. But I want you to remove everything you think you know about Shakespeare, because most of that was actually invented in the 18th century by the 18th century literary critics who decided how he should be marketed and then pitched. Shakespeare wrote 154, actually slightly more than 154, but 154 sonnets that we know today as Shakespeare's sonnets, and then he wrote a few more that went into his plays. And so where I want to start today is with the word sonnet. And I think most people watching this have probably also heard the word sonnet. So I'm going to ask you to tell me, you can do this with chat. Do I have access to see chat, Corey?
I don't know.
So you can do this with chat, or you can do this with oral. Oh yes, I can absolutely see chat. Oh okay. No, I can only see chat to you. So you can see.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's different. Okay. I can relay stuff to you, though.
You can relay stuff to me. So this is even better, because Lynn and Carrie, you're my students, and I guess official sort of Corey's my student too.
Yep.
So yep. I want you to type into the chat if you can, or you can say it out loud if you're feeling brave. What do you think a sonnet is? When you hear sonnet, it probably has associations. If you've never heard of a sonnet, that's fine. You can type in, I've never heard of a sonnet before, and Corey won't tell me who you are when he relays that to me. Or if you want to unmute and tell me what you think a sonnet is, that's fine too. There are actually no wrong answers to this question, pretty much.
So we have a poem in a specific form is a sort of a structured poem. I would say, like, just from the pure sound of it, you just say the word and I never heard the word before. I mean, it reminds me of song. It sounds like something you might sing.
It does
Maybe.
sound like something you might sing. It is traditionally taught as having a specific form. We have three of you. Is there a third response?
No, I kind of lumped the two of them together because they're similar.
Oh, I had a slide about that. Sorry. All right. So I went to the Oxford English Dictionary, which is my online favorite website of all time. And the Oxford English Dictionary, if you've never encountered it before, it's the place where nerds hang out, and it tells you the history of how each word has been used in the English language. And at least one of you, if not two of you, are completely right. What a sonnet used to mean was a song or a tune or a ballad or some kind of lyric verse in some form. And it actually didn't come to have that formal term for almost 200 years. So you can see that the first date that they give, because they're giving you the history of how this word's been used in English, was actually in 1380 in the poem Cleanness. And I cannot possibly read that. Corey, if you'd like to,
Sure.
you're welcome to.
There was ringing on ricks of riche metals, clattering of covacles, song als muri.
Oh, that was so beautiful.
There was there's lots of ringing and beating of things and clattering, and so there's lots of joyful noise going on in that line.
So a sonnet is just a song, or actually in a couple of years later in the Renaissance, by the 1500s, it just means poem, basically. And almost anything we think of as a poem could have been a sonnet. And then it comes to mean what we get taught in school. A poem of 14 lines using any of a number of formal rhyme schemes in English, typically written in iambic pentameter and usually having a single theme. If you've had to do this in an English class, your teacher probably made you beat it out, ba-da, 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 ba-da. And then she made you do that with a sonnet. I'm not going to do that because we're going to have fun in this class, so we're not being formal education-y anymore. So there's two really different ways to approach a sonnet. Shakespeare did the 14 lines. He mostly did the iambic pentameter, but I want to get on to the actual poems. And I just want to show you the title page. These are Shakespeare's sonnets printed in 1609. All the print book images I'm going to use tonight are from the first edition printed in 1609 by Thomas Thorpe, and then I'll have some pictures later from the second edition published in 1640 by John Benson. They're all from the Folger Shakespeare Library, and if you're a teacher and you're watching this, they have amazing, freely accessible, high-quality images that you can access and look at. So if you're really interested, I've got the URLs on all the slides. You can go type those in and see not only this page, but the whole text of Shakespeare's sonnets and just flip through the pages. It's super cool. So when they were first printed, this is how Shakespeare's sonnets looked. They were printed on these funny pages and they were kind of lined up together. And the first one doesn't have a number, but every other sonnet is just numbered. Lots of people like to read the first 17 as all being read in a sequence to a young man. I don't know how big your screens are. They're a little bit small, I think, on this image. So I'm going to read you the first 4 lines of the first poem on this page, and then about the last 6 lines from the last poem on this page. From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. But as the riper or reaper should by time decease, his tender air might bear his memory. And then I'm skipping down to the last 6 lines. How much more praise is that true? No. Where is it? Oh yes, the last 4 lines. Sorry. How much more praise deserve thy beauty's use? If thou could answer this fair child of mine, shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. And so lots of people like to read these sonnets as being written as part of a long sequence urging a young man to go out into the world and procreate. You can sort of read these first 17 as urging anybody to go out into the world and procreate. Lots of different attitudes to have about it. But I want to pretend for tonight that Shakespeare didn't do that, that these sonnets can be read as individual poems, which they actually were in the Renaissance. And I want us to ignore the context surrounding Sonnet 2 and just look at the poem on its own. You will notice that the 14 lines of Sonnet 2 don't work. They run over onto the next page, and I haven't given you an image of the next page. So I've reproduced that page break on the next slide. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you this sonnet, which is now up on the slide on your screen. And as I read it, I want you to think of what images or metaphors might come to mind within this sonnet. So I've already told you that it has to do a little bit perhaps with childbearing or procreating, but see if you can find any more. Lynn, you've got one already. That's so exciting. Hang on to that, because I'm going to ask you, and we're going to see how many we can find in about the next 5 minutes. So I'm going to read it so you can hear the words. You might also get some puns. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tottered weed of small worth held. Then being asked, where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say, within thine own deep sunken eyes, were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer this fair child of mine, shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. To get to the last 2 lines, you have to physically turn the page. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelest it cold. And there's a little pun there with could, because they have non-standard spelling. So I know it's a lot to throw at you right now. Here's a new sonnet surprise. There aren't wrong answers to this either. Kind of like the sonnet can mean basically anything, any song, lyric, verse, or poem. What do you observe in Sonnet 2? You can be out loud, you can type to Corey and he can relate to me, whichever you prefer.
There's a lot.
Oh,
There's
it's great,
lot.
Isn't it?
There's a lot.
Shakespeare's amazing. There are probably 30 different contexts for this poem.
Yeah.
So give me the first one you saw.
Front and top and bottom. We've got winter in the first line and the warm and cold in the last line. So there seems to be a he's kind of connecting the coldness thing and with the changing of time at the beginning and the end.
Yeah, seasons, time, temperature, all of the contrast, all of those things. Good. Lynn or Carrie, anything?
Things having to do with the earth, or like the tottered weed, trenches.
Digging trenches. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, there's so much agriculture in this poem.
And the treasure too, like the digging there. I think maybe we're even talking about, because where thy beauty lies and all the treasure, as if it's like the treasure is lying like buried or something like that. It needs to be dug up.
Beauty's field.
Yes, fields. Yeah, there are probably, I think there are about 10 that I've identified agricultural metaphors in here. This whole poem, tied in with that idea of your child will replace you, is also about agriculture. You plant stuff and it grows out of the earth, the same kind of growth and perpetuating human life, perpetuating natural life. Yes. And while you're talking about trenches, the last time I talked about this sonnet with somebody, they pointed out the first 2 lines have besiege and trenches, and it has these military metaphors
stuff,
at the front, which I was so excited. I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Livery isn't what, a uniform?
Livery can be a uniform, like a regiment. Yeah.
Ooh, and that leads to my favorite pun, which is weed, right? So because weeds in 17th century usage means your clothes, right? Yep. So weed and livery is like the same thing, right? So thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tottered weed. So one day you're going to be wearing rags, right? Is what that means on the one hand, but of course it also means like a weed, a plant that's fallen over, right? So that's so it's both agricultural and clothing. That was my favorite pun that jumped out at me.
Yes, and while you're mentioning rags and having to wear rags someday, there's also a lot of words that have to do with money.
Yes.
So there's a lot of words about value and money, like treasure and riches. So you start out rich and full of treasure and splendor, and then by the end of your life, you're just walking around wearing rags and you're tattered and miserable.
And then
right?
the shall some might count and
Shall
stuff.
some
We
might
get,
count.
lots of financial language there.
Yes.
Thriftless praise, right? Yeah. So we're being prodigal with our praise, right? We're spending praise lavishly on the one hand, and then, but then there's the summing of the count that happens, later on. So you've got to, that's cool.
Thriftless praise and all eating shame.
Yes, the contrast between praise and shame, like contrast between winter and summer. Yeah. Also, I mean, going along with the agriculture, the all eating shame is a food metaphor, and they've kind of got some subtle food metaphors in here, definitely.
And there's a deep joke. There's an icon joke there. All eating shame. Because of course, all eating, as all good Renaissance folks know, when we think about something that eats everything, we're thinking about time, right? One of the great expressions, tempus edax rerum, right? That time, the devourer of all things. And so Shakespeare was really fond of that metaphor of, the tooth of time and stuff from like Measure for Measure, right? So anyway, it's sorry, I've never heard of Shakespeare before. I forgot. But anyway, point is, time is the thing that eats everything, right? That's the very, very pervasive imagery. And so he's, on the one hand, he's not talking about time. Right. He's like, we're an all eating, like shame is going to eat everything. Like everything's going to get eaten up in shame. But of course, he is talking about time. Like he's talking about the effect that time has. And so he's kind of using that famous image associated with time to describe the effects of time. So it's pretty cool.
And having ever heard of Shakespeare before, Corey, wink, wink, you won't know that one of his later sonnets actually begins with the words devouring time.
Devouring time, exactly. Right, yes. Yes.
So this is definitely foreshadowing to that, but you don't know that.
No, I have no idea. Yeah.
It's so hard to remove what we know of Shakespeare
yeah.
in any context. Yes, you're absolutely right. He's definitely playing with time and that waste and the eating and what does time take away, basically? What does time make us gaunt or losing things? There's at least one more, so I'm going to give you one more minute to see if you can catch anything else. And there are dozens, so if you don't catch the other one that I have that I'm thinking of, one of the wonderful things about this sonnet is I've probably talked about it with 10 groups of students, and every single group comes up with something different that I've never thought about before. It's so rich and lovely.
I'm tempted to say like it's like a forging or metallurgy thing, both this were to be new made, right? As if it were like being reforged. And also that I think proving. Yeah, exactly.
Proving and treasure. Yep.
Yeah. As that same kind of metal work kind of
and
language there.
Metal even can be new made when it's old.
Right.
So it works even with words that aren't metallurgical or alchemical in tone. Yes. Yeah. See, that's lovely.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of almost a Tolkien reference there because he's got so much forging.
Right. Oh, and by the way, speaking of Tolkien references, people in the Twitch chat were pointing out that, of course, Gollum was obviously familiar with that favorite expression of Shakespeare's as well. This thing all thing devours. Time as the devourer of things. If Bilbo had only, read more Shakespeare, he would have been right on that without having to be helped by luck. But yeah.
I mean, I definitely see that's Bilbo's main problem as a character.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. It's okay.
What does shall some might count mean?
So in this context, it's basically he's going to pay my bill. Right. So we've had all these metaphors for loss. When I'm well, that's the easy answer. The real answer is that we've just read this sonnet in 5 different ways. And so you can make those words mean different things. But the simplest meaning is to read these as he will take my place. He will pay my bill. He will be what I haven't been able to be, because this is obviously about a child and what benefit a child will bring to the addressee if the addressee will only hurry up and have a child.
Do you think that's count in the sense of like account, like ACC, like the way that we would say account, like my account?
I read that as account. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Although you could read it as the kind son coming along and doing his father's figures and checking his numbers. Oh, you have counted right. Good job.
That would be a kind thing to do for one's father, wouldn't it?
It would be a kind. You should tell your sons that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just going to point out before we shift, you all haven't picked up on it, and I don't say giving you 5 minutes to read the sonnet. There are also a lot of nautical metaphors in the last half of this poem they always kind of signal out to me, like the sinking and the tottering and the words about depth and things.
Yeah.
So if we had more time, if we were doing this in a full hour, we would probably spend 15 or 20 minutes just seeing how much we could plunder out of this sonnet. Since we're only doing half an hour, I'm going to kind of skip on and give you challenge number 2. Actually, I guess it's challenge number 3, because first I asked you to tell me what a sonnet is, and then I asked you find all the metaphors in this random poem that I've thrown at you. My third challenge, we don't do this with Shakespeare's poems, but if you had to, how would you title it? Because when we read poems today, we don't read them numbered generally. We read them with a little title that kind of tells us the theme or the main idea. We've just found 6 or 7 themes or main ideas. So what I want to know is, how would you title this poem if you had this poem? You can type your answers into the chat, or you can just blurt them out. There's no wrong way to do this.
Can I be facetious?
I'm not.
Your biological clock is ticking?
Yes.
That is a great reading. Your biological clock is ticking. Yes, and that's still even better, Lynn, because I know you haven't heard of Shakespeare before, but that's actually in the Shakespeare abridged play. There's a whole scene with Hamlet and Ophelia, and the audience is supposed to shout, "Your biological clock is ticking" at Ophelia. So that's perfect. Yes.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I've got at least 3 of you, and if somebody wants to post in on Twitch, Corey clearly has his finger on many pulses.
I do, yeah. One suggestion was "Time Will Show."
Time will show.
Tarlonial, that was Rosie. Tarlonial suggests "The Treasure of Thy Lusty Days."
Taking words right from the poem.
Kind of
that's
extracting
beautiful.
that as it is. I was trying to do that too, but I was like, I keep being torn between like 6 or 7 different phrases that I want to elevate to the title, you know.
And I love the pun you found there, whoever that is. The treasure of your lusty days.
Lusty days, yeah.
And of course,
yeah.
back then, lusty is more healthy, but we have this wonderful modern connotation for lust and lustful, and your lust could certainly cause you to procreate and come up with treasure at the end. So that's great.
Yeah, lusty is, yeah, as you say, a much happier word back then. But yeah. But not without the same kind of connotations as well. As you say. Sorry, go ahead.
I was thinking of something along the lines of "Let's make hay today."
Oh, I love that, because that gets the planting and the agriculture in there. Oh, and John Donne would love that too. So many exciting things. So what I want to do for the last few minutes, did you know? You probably don't know. I would bet that even Corey doesn't know that in the Renaissance, Sonnet 2 by Shakespeare was the favored sonnet, and lots of people loved to copy it into their commonplace books, and they gave it titles.
Oh, awesome.
So you've got a couple titles. I think your titles are actually better than theirs, but they don't speak ill of the dead. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways this sonnet was titled, so we can think about that a little bit. So this is from a manuscript that's at the Folger that has the lovely pictures that I've been using. They have weird numbers. V means it's in the 17th century, and then A means it's a reasonably small manuscript, and then it's manuscript number 345 from that era in that size. It's super tiny on my screen. On this page, the bottom left corner of the 2-page spread is Sonnet 2, and I've blown it up for you on the next slide. And then I've transcribed it for you, and they called it Space Altera, a song. So that goes back to that earlier definition we had of a sonnet as being a song. And if you can see on the manuscript, they've actually numbered the stanzas on the side and the margins. You can even sing this as a song, although we don't know what melody they might have used. I assume that you would have to sing the fourth line twice to make it work metrically, since it's only 2 lines at the very end. And Space Altera is a great phrase to pick. It actually comes from Virgil's Aeneid, which was written in Latin, and it means a second hope or another hope. And it's the word that's used to describe Aeneas's son as he's carrying him out of the ruins of Troy. He's the second hope. So that's a word already used to refer to a second child.
Huh.
Right.
And then it gets used to refer to a second hope. So if you go on and make hay while the sun shines, you'll have more hope in your life. You'll sum your count, all these other beautiful, lovely, life-giving metaphors.
Man, so this person decided that the point of it was about having an heir and the importance of that, and then embedded that in a Latin-based Aeneid reference. That's kind of flexing
awesome.
right there. I mean, not gonna lie, that's not bad.
It's pretty clever. And actually a bunch of people copied it from him. So Space Altera is one of the most popular titles for this sonnet, because they copied it off of him, and they were, oh, okay, here's this great title.
It's pretty good.
You can't see this because I've covered it up with the text, but the poem right under it, but when the sonnet ends, is actually a satirical epitaph. And I've got the text of that, so I'm going to read it to you. It's on Sir William Sands, and it says, "Unto our names we must not trust, for I was Sands, but now am dust."
Oh.
Yes.
And so what I think is just great about this, here's this like lovely, hopeful song about procreating and life going on. And they're like, let's just make fun of the dead. That's a funny name. Now you're dust. Very irreverent, but that's just the kind of thing you find in Renaissance manuscripts. They love the sonnets, they love the metaphors, deeply classical references. Look how smart I am. And he's like, oh, I thought this was funny too. So we're going to move on. This is another Folger manuscript, same century, same kind of size. This one's number 170. This manuscript, like the original, you have to turn the page. So the picture on the left is the front of the page, which is called the recto. The picture on the right is the back of the page, which is called the verso. You can maybe see, I don't know if you can see it, the poem right after this is Mr. Herrick, another Renaissance poem, his Welcome to Sack, the drink. So we've squashed this in next to poems about drinking, all kinds of good things, drinking alcohol, specifically kind of beer-like alcohol. This one is called To One That Would Die a Maid, which is a really different context than Space Altera, the high Latin, we have hope for our futures.
Yeah.
What's going on with this?
Well, it's like the glass half empty version, right? So like the first one emphasizes the message that's being delivered to the person. And this one is emphasizing the person who appears in the person's opinion to be not receiving that message, right? So it's the same kind of thing, but it's looking at it from a very different perspective.
And that kind of depends on how brutal you want to make it. Is this like To One Who Would Die a Maid, like emphasis on death? And of course we talked about time and all the ravaging kinds of words. But it also, you can kind of read the title as kind of a seduction. You think you want to die, and maid is used in the Renaissance for virgin.
Just virgin,
Right.
yeah, generally, yeah.
So you think you want to die a virgin, but hang on. Think of all the bad things that will happen if you have nobody to do these jolly things.
And your biological clock is ticking.
That's it.
Biological clock is ticking. See, you got it right on the head. They would have put that if they had known that phrase. Yes, you're all right online with all these early Renaissance readers. So I have 1 minute. I see Corey checking his watch.
No. Hey, far be it from me to hustle people along. Besides, after you is nothing but I'm doing the rest of the things all by myself. So that means I can relax and not have to worry that I'm keeping other people anymore. So.
But I think your fans are building for the Tolkien trivia. I know that's
true.
coming.
It's coming.
Okay. So we've had Space Altera, High Latin Hope, had To One That Would Die a Maid. Shakespeare's sonnets, which were printed in 1609 in that numbered sequence, were reprinted in 1640 in this wonderful little book that has been overlooked and forgotten for generations. Got disdained by the 18th century people who made Shakespeare Shakespeare. It's my favorite version of the sonnets. I don't know if this is staying up on YouTube. People probably figured that out by now. That could ruin me as a scholar. It's this charming book, and I kind of made it small on the slide. You can't really tell, but it's about the size, the book, of a pack of 3x5 index cards.
Wow.
It's this little tiny book. So it's on my screen. It's actually a little bit too big because I have a big screen. A little bit thicker than a smartphone right now. It's a tiny little book. It has all but 8 of Shakespeare's 154 sonnets and a bunch of his other poems. They have this nice woodcut that you can see on the screen. And what the compiler of this book did is he went through and he grouped the sonnets, and then he gave them titles. So Sonnet 2, he lumped right after Sonnet 1. He mostly kept them in order. You can see it on the left. It's called Love's Cruelty. And it's also got Sonnet 3 after it. We haven't talked about Sonnet 3. And I think this is so different, not to think of this as urging you to do anything, but urging you to think about why is love brutal? Because I don't read the sonnet as having much that love is faulting in the poem.
No.
It would actually be much better titled something like Time's Cruelty.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, what's love done to anybody in that poem? I mean, like literally done to anybody. I mean, I don't mean just what harm has it done. Like, what has it done at all? Like, how's love even involved in that poem? I guess is what I mean.
It's basically a poem about sex.
Sex and time and beauty and stuff, Yeah.
Another poem in this collection, which we don't have time to look at, is called Injurious Time, which would actually be a better title for this poem.
Digging the trenches and whatnot,
And if you can see on this page, the poem on the bottom right, it's called Youthful Glory, which would also be a better poem title for Sonnet 2.
Yeah. Why was this edition, you said it was disdained?
This edition was disdained. There's a short answer, there's a long answer. And the short answer, which is more politically correct as well, is that it came out after Shakespeare's death, so these titles are not considered authorial. They're reorganized from the first edition, so also there's you put it in groups that maybe Shakespeare didn't intend, which is a whole controversial thing that we're not going to get into in this class. And then the editor actually changed a couple words and left out a few lines. There's some very light editing going on. And so the combination of those three things being after Shakespeare's life, they decided this is not authorial, it's not real Shakespeare, but actually it's this wonderful, cute little readable text that breaks the sonnets down. It's really fun to read. It has the titles. Sometimes they're spot on, and sometimes you have to kind of think about why would somebody read this sonnet as having this title? Why is this about love's cruelty, and why did you think it was? So I think this is a really beautiful way to look at the sonnets, because it makes us think about other readers and how they might have interpreted the poems in ways that we don't expect. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer questions. I know we've gone just a couple of minutes over.
That's okay.
Yay, Signum.
Yeah, exactly. It's all good. Perfect freedom. That's what space is about. Perfect freedom. See, so there've been a bunch of comments. People have been kind of participating and
that's
commenting on
wonderful.
stuff as we've been going through. Yeah. Right. Rosie's wondering if the person who's waiting for a love that won't come was thinking about the love's cruelty thing. And maybe that's why the like exhortation, right, has to be made.
And
Yeah.
one way of reading the love's cruelty is also that the speaker finds love cruel because the speaker loves the addressee, and the addressee is still determined to be a maid or hasn't
Right.
come around to deciding to reciprocate that love as well.
Right. Get on with the procreating. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Right.
Sonnet too is pretty mean to a young girl who thinks she's very beautiful and is
Right,
looking
right.
very longingly at her soldier lover, and he's saying, "You're going to get ugly, and I'm not going to like you then. So let's get this on now." That's
one way to bait it.
that's just really going to turn me on.
It's
Yeah.
it's pretty brutal. Now there are
That's
people,
brutal.
There are people who think this is written to a young man
Mhm.
as well.
Could be, yes.
And I love that it's so gender neutral. It works both ways. But
It
you're
does.
right. Like that idea as a woman of having deep trenches. Like, I'm getting on in age, and I know there's some wrinkles there. But to have them called trenches is just so mean, right? You know?
Character lines.
Yeah, exactly.
But Shakespeare's not doing that. Like Shakespeare's not, oh, you'll still be nice. Like, no, you're gonna have trenches on your face, trenches and potholes. You better get on with producing somebody new.
Tottered weed, man. I mean, that's harsh. That's harsh. Yeah.
And
Of
actually,
small worth held, right? I mean, it's yeah.
we didn't have time to talk about this, but some of the manuscripts changed the words, and one of the manuscripts actually describes them as rotten weeds, which is even worse.
Yikes.
That's very different.
It is very different.
Yes. Now it's hard to tell because tottered and rotten are sort of similar, and they're written in handwriting, so it's hard to tell whether the copier was just misreading it and guessing at the most likely word, or whether they actually went and changed the word intentionally. But it's very clearly rotten in the manuscript.
Yeah.
But either way, it's still this horribly bleak decay image, which fits with the time. It works. What we have is so fragmented, it's hard to know, but it's wonderful that it gives us so many different ways to think about the texts.
Yeah.
Well, you could say it's bleak, or you could say it's realistic. I mean, like the seven stages of man, or whatever. That.
Right.
Where's,
I mean, your body goes into the earth, rots, right?
but where's your immortality? It's through your
Children.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got this. You got to have the succession going on.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. And I was just processing something that I didn't before about the blood, warm and cold blood at the end. So you've got like both the passion and the coldness, right? So you've got the like, you feel your blood cold, meaning you're not into me, but like you should feel thy blood warm, right? So you got like the warming up of cold blood, which is kind of the point, right, of the poem on the one hand. But then you've also got the whole youth and age thing, right? The young have hot blood, and the old, the older you get, the colder your blood gets. So you've got the whole aging thing, and it's the way to reverse aging, right? Is the procreation thing. So I wasn't even processing that before.
And I think it can also even be a little bit racy, like hot blood.
Oh yeah.
Getting out there, and so I mean, this is one of my favorites because it's so layered with so many meanings. We could probably do this for an hour.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, more than an hour. I mean, we've just been throwing out ideas. We still have to like put it all together, figure out how it goes,
And I like how, coming from a decade on the other side, he thinks she's old and ugly, or he is old and ugly at 40.
Right. How quaint, right? How quaint.
Yes.
Now there is also a manuscript version of this poem where they changed the number to 70, which is actually 60.
60.
Yes.
When 70 winters shall besiege thy brow. Okay.
There we go.
Winters,
There we go.
yes.
See, yes, much better.
Yeah. Probably transcribed by somebody in their 50s, you're thinking?
or even their late 30s.
Right. Let's push that back a bit. Yeah, exactly.
This is coming a little soon.
Right. Striking a bit close to home, perhaps. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Awesome.
thank you all for
It was so much fun.
participating. This was so fun. Have a happy Tolkien trivia. And if
That's
you want
right.
to know more about Sonnet 2, sign up for my Sonnet module.
There
And
we
if
go.
you want to know more about Veni Veni Emmanuel, sign up for my Latin module.
Excellent. Yeah. So we're gonna we'll be, and of course we'll be, as I mentioned at the very, when I was describing the space program, likely expanding some of our module offerings to give people even more choices. So yeah, there could be more of Renaissance poetry stuff with you, and not to mention more Latin and other things like that going on too, right? Very
Definitely.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Faith. That was so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much, Carrie and Lynn, for being my students. And thank you also to the fine folks on Twitter. I don't know who you are, but I really value and appreciate your contributions.
Very
Thank
cool.
you.
Thank you, guys.